This is the fourth lesson in the topic trigonometry, the cosine ratio. Cosine ratio, secant ratio, and inverse cosine. So by now we've covered two of the trig ratios, that being tangent and sine. With each of those ratios, we've talked about the inverse of those ratios, that being our inverse tangent and our inverse sine. So in this particular video, and in this part of the lesson, we're going to talk about being able to find the inverse cosine. So let's take a look. So to find the inverse cosine, it is no different than when we found the inverse tangent and the inverse sine. With finding the inverse cosine, we need to know two lengths of the side of the right triangle, and that's going to make it possible for us to find the acute angle degree on the inside. And so since we're finding degrees, it is important that you remember, just like we talked about in our previous two lessons, it's important that you remember that you change your calculator from radians to degrees for this part of the lesson, because we are finding the inside degrees of an angle. The other thing to remember is, just like with our inverse tangent and our inverse sine, we're going to use the symbol here to find our inverse cosine. So let's take a look at our example below. We're going to use the inverse cosine to calculate the measure of angle B. So angle B is going to be our reference angle. So to find the inverse cosine, we can start off by finding the cosine for measure of angle B. So we're going to find the cosine of B. So remember, cosine is going to be our adjacent over our hypotenuse. So in this case, the cosine of B is going to be our adjacent or our attached of 16 over our hypotenuse of 18. So now remember, we're looking for the inverse cosine. So we're going to just simply find the inverse of that, of 16 over 18. And in fact, let's just kind of move that so we get a little bit more space. So we're going to look for the inverse of 16 over 18. And when I do that, I get 27. In fact, I get 27.27 degrees. Now, just a small note, you may have gotten on your calculator, you may see 27.266. Remember, if we round to the nearest hundredth, I'm going to then bump this up. So then I get 27.27 degrees. All right, so let's take a look at another example. So in our next example here, we're going to, same thing, calculate the measure of angle X for the triangle below, and we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So again, we're going to be using our cosine inverse to find the measure of that angle X. So that is going to be our reference angle here. And so we began by finding the cosine of X. Cosine of X is our adjacent, which is going to be 10, over our hypotenuse, which is 16. And so then we have the inverse of that. Remember, you changed your calculator from radians to degrees. I punch this into my calculator, and so I get the cosine inverse, which basically is for X, is going to be 51.32 degrees. And so the measure of that acute angle is going to be 51.32. All right, see you in our next video.